There's a part of personal growth that no one really prepares you for. It's not the awareness, it's not the breakthroughs, it's not even the healing itself. It's the loneliness, and not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone, but the kind that shows up when your internal world starts to change and your external world hasn't caught up yet. It's that quiet feeling of realizing that the spaces you once felt comfortable in don't feel the same anymore. The conversations don't land the same. The environments don't feel as aligned. The dynamics that once felt normal now feel heavy or draining or even confusing. And it's subtle at first. It's not like you wake up one day and everything feels different. It's more like you start noticing small things. You notice how certain conversations leave you feeling disconnected instead of fulfilled. You notice how certain patterns in people that you used to overlook now stand out clearly. You notice how you're responding differently, thinking differently, wanting different things. And with that awareness, something shifts. Not dramatically, but enough for you to feel it. And that's usually when the internal conflict begins, because a part of you is growing, but another part of you is still connected to what's familiar, to the people, to the routines, to the dynamics that have been a part of your life for a long time. And now you're in between. You're no longer who you used to be, but you're still becoming who you're meant to be. And that in between space can feel incredibly lonely because it's not just about being alone. It's about feeling like you don't fully belong in the spaces you once did, but you haven't fully found your new space yet either. And that can create this sense of isolation that's hard to explain because from the outside, everything might look the same. You might still be around the same people, still living the same life in many ways, but internally, everything feels different. And that difference creates distance, not always physically, but emotionally, energetically, mentally. And one of the hardest parts about this is that it often comes with guilt for pulling away, guilt for changing, guilt for not wanting the same things or the same connections or the same experiences. And that guilt can be heavy because it makes you question yourself. Am I being selfish? Am I outgrowing people or am I just pushing them away? Why can't I just be the way I used to be? And those questions can make you feel like you're doing something wrong, but you're not. What you're experiencing is a natural part of growth because growth changes your perspective. And when your perspective changes, your preferences change, your boundaries change, your tolerance changes, and naturally, your environment starts to feel different. Not because anything is inherently wrong with it, but because it no longer matches where you are internally. And that mismatch is what creates the feeling of disconnection because connection is rooted in resonance, in shared understanding, shared energy, shared alignment. So when you begin to evolve and your internal world shifts, you may no longer resonate with the same dynamics. And that doesn't mean those dynamics are bad. It just means they're no longer aligned with you. And that's a hard thing to accept sometimes because it means acknowledging that growth comes with change, and change often comes with loss. Not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, gradual, like slowly realizing that you don't feel the same excitement to engage in certain conversations or that you need more space than you used to or even that certain behaviors you once tolerated now feel like something you can't ignore. And that's where boundaries come in because as you grow, you naturally begin to set them, not necessarily in a confrontational way, but in a self respecting way. You start choosing what you engage with, what you allow, what you give your energy to. And that can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to it, especially if your identity was always tied to being accommodating or easygoing or always available. Because now you're asking more of yourself. And by extension, you're asking more of the people around you, not in a demanding way, but in a way that reflects your growth. And not everyone will understand that. Not everyone will meet you there. And that's another layer of the loneliness because sometimes growth reveals misalignment in relationships that once felt solid. And that doesn't mean those relationships were fake. It just means they were built on a version of you that is evolving. And that can be hard to process because there's history there, there's familiarity, there's comfort. And letting go or even just creating distance can feel like you're losing something important. And that's where the guilt deepens because you start to feel like you're leaving people behind, like you're changing in a way that separates you from them. And a part of you might want to shrink back, to go back to what's familiar, to avoid that discomfort. But here's the truth: growth doesn't ask you to abandon people, but it does ask you to be honest about what aligns with you. And sometimes that honesty creates space, and that space can feel lonely, but it's not empty, it's transitional. It's the space where you are recalibrating, where you are integrating who you're becoming, where you are making room for new experiences, new connections, new alignment, even if you can't fully see it yet. And this is where trust becomes important because this phase of growth requires you to trust something you can't fully see yet. To trust that discomfort, the distance, the loneliness is not a sign that something is wrong, but a sign that something is changing. And change, especially internal change, often requires a period of separation, not as punishment, but as realignment. And this is something that shows up in many ways, even astrologically, because when you're going through periods of deep personal growth, there are often transits or cycles that activate introspection, that pull your energy inward, that encourage you to reflect, to reassess, to release. And during those times, it's common to feel more isolated, more internal, more detached from external distractions, not because you're meant to stay there, but because you're being guided to reconnect with yourself, to understand yourself on a deeper level, to build a relationship with yourself that isn't dependent on external validation or constant connection. And that's a powerful thing, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. Because when you learn how to be with yourself, when you learn how to sit with your thoughts, your emotions, your evolution, you develop a different kind of strength, a different kind of clarity, a different kind of stability. And from that place, your relationships begin to shift because you're no longer seeking connection from a place of need, but from a place of alignment. And that changes everything. But let's come back to the guilt for a moment, because that's something a lot of people struggle with during this phase: the guilt of not showing up the same way, the guilt of needing space, the guilt of changing. And it's important to understand where that guilt comes from because often it's rooted in old conditioning, in beliefs about what it means to be a good person, a good friend, a good partner, a good family member. Beliefs that say you should always be available, always be understanding, always maintain connections, no matter what, even if they no longer feel aligned. But growth challenges those beliefs. It asks you to redefine what being a good person means to you. And sometimes being a good person includes being honest about your needs, about your boundaries, about your capacity. And the honesty might not always feel comfortable, but it is necessary because without it, you end up abandoning yourself to maintain connections. And that's not sustainable. So the question becomes, can you allow yourself to grow without making yourself wrong for it? Can you honor your evolution without attaching guilt to it? Can you trust that creating space is not the same as rejecting people? Because it's not. It's choosing yourself. And choosing yourself doesn't mean you don't care about others. It means you're no longer compromising your well being to maintain familiarity. And that's a shift, a big one. And it takes time to fully integrate. So if you're in this phase right now where things feel different, where you feel a little more distant, a little more internal, where you're questioning your connections, your environment, even yourself, I want you to understand that this is part of the process. You are not doing something wrong. You are evolving. And evolution often requires letting go of what no longer fits, even if it once did, even if it was meaningful, even if it's hard, because you are not meant to stay the same. You are meant to grow, to expand, to become more aligned with who you truly are. And that journey, while it can feel lonely at times, it's also incredibly powerful because it brings you closer to yourself. And from that place, everything else begins to align: the right people, the right environments, the right experiences. Not forced, not chased, but naturally drawn to the version of you that you are becoming. So trust the phase, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels uncertain, even if it feels lonely, because it won't last forever. It's just a chapter, a necessary one. And on the other side of it is a version of your life that feels more aligned, more authentic, more you. And that is worth everything you're growing through right now.